Welcome to this edition of On Point. And I'm joined by a noted historian, a person who has written an authoritative biography of Veer Savarkar. Mr. Sampath, thank you very much for giving time. And let me begin this edition by asking you this question. When Rajnath Singh spoke about Gandhi and Savarkar and said that the Gandhi also insisted that, he must file a petition, there was a furor saying that Gandhi never said it. So can you please elaborate on the historicity of this issue?
I think it's a needless controversy. What Mr. Rajnath Singh said is actually backed by facts. Savarkar, of course, filed several petitions right from 1911 when he was lodged in cellular jail. Gandhi came back to India in 1915 from South Africa, but the petition that probably Rajnath Singh ji referred to was the 1920 petition. So by then, 10 years had already elapsed of both Vinayak Damodar and his elder brother Baba Rao being in Kalapani. And there was the royal proclamation of Emperor George V after the culmination of the First World War, where several political prisoners were being let off as a general amnesty. It was only the Savarkar brothers who were held back because they were considered as D category or dangerous category criminals. And so that is when, after filing so many petitions which were rejected, Narayan Rao, the younger brother, approached Mahatma Gandhi and said, since you are an influential politician of the country, can you please put a word? And so Gandhiji has written a letter on the 25th of January 1920, quoted in the Collected Works of Mahatma Gandhi, volume 19. For those who doubt sources, they can go and check it up. It's all available online on the Gandhi Sevashram website, where he writes to Narayan Rao saying, I advise your brothers to file a petition, and let me also see what I can do from my end. I will also try to secure their release. And 5 months later, on 26th of May 1920, Gandhiji writes a 4-page article in Young India titled Savarkar Brothers, where he builds a case for their release, saying, they were brave men, they took the wrong path of picking up the gun. Now that the Montagu-Chelmsford reforms have come in place, they would like to come back to constitutional process with the Congress, and so we should kind of release them and give a pardon to them and so on. So if the whole idea of petitioning was such a bad thing, that it was an indication of your treachery or of your cowardice and so on, why did Gandhiji advise Savarkar's brother to ask his brothers to file a petition? Why did he file a petition on their behalf or speak to the British, as he is quoted in his letter, and also write an article in favor of them, arguing for their release? So I think it is all this needless controversy made on the basis of contemporary politics. I think, of course, the clarification should have been it was the 1920 petition which Savarkar's brothers filed on the advice of Gandhiji. But that's a fact. It's borne by documents. I have quoted those letters both in my volume 1 of the book, Echoes from a Forgotten Past, and also on social media. I've made all these documents public today. So I think that should set the matter to rest.
But Mr. Sampath, why has the issue of petition become so contentious that, he petitioned the British? There were other leaders who never petitioned the British. Can you please elaborate on this?
Yeah, so I think that's just a very, very, that also was not a big deal those days. As I said, even Gandhiji himself was adopting the whole idea of a petition. That means it was a normal procedure. It was not a special privilege that was given only to Savarkar or to somebody, because he was close to the British or anything. All political prisoners, especially leaders of revolutionary movements, were given this. It was not a mercy petition. I always don't call it a mercy petition. It's not a maafi-nama. It's called a yajna petition, like a bail application you put today. You were given this option. And particularly someone like Savarkar, who had 50 years life imprisonment, 2 transportations for life, instead of rotting in jail, it was also part of strategy to come out of jail and work for country. So many others, whether it was Barin Ghosh, Aurobindo Ghosh's brother, who was part of the Anushilan Samiti and the revolutionary movement in Bengal, Sachindranath Sanyal, who later went on to form the HRA and who was involved in the Kakori case, and a spiritual, a revolutionary leader for Bhagat Singh and all of that. So these people filed petitions, same kind of petition, saying we abide by the British laws, we will not participate in politics, we will be very faithful to you. They would come out, do what they want. So the British also did not trust the petitions for whatever it was worth. And also Savarkar was being like a, spokesperson for all the other, young revolutionaries who were there. For instance, in 1917 petition, he famously says that if my name is an obstacle to the release of all the other prisoners, then you can omit my name and release the others. And that will give me as much joy as my own release would do. So that it was very clear he was being a spokesperson for all of them. So all these facts stare us in the face, but still we kind of go on and on. There were so many, the left talk so much. The Shripad Dange, who was founder of the CPI, he filed a petition to the British and got out of the jail. A few later, the brave hearts of the Kakori case, whether it was Ram Prasad Bismil, Ashfaq Khan and others, petitions were filed on their behalf by several leaders, including Pandit Madan Mohan Malviya. And even Gandhiji supposed to have interceded in the case of Bhagat Singh to get his execution, stalled. So this intercession with the government to ensure that the revolutionaries who were either jailed or going to be executed, this was a very, very common practice. It's just held out against one person. Again, as I said, for petty contemporary politics, and nothing can cure that. Historical facts are different.
Mr. Sampath, is it also because of the fact that in context of today's politics, it's not the cool thing to say that the people within the Congress had a conversation with the Hindu right? Some even sympathize with it. Like, for example, Nehru was against the participation of a lot of senior Congress leaders, the reconstruction of Somnath. But nonetheless, they did, including Mr. Munshi and Patel. So has the current climate put a wheel on the real conversation which was taking place before 1947 of people with different ideologies and shades and color?
In 1966, the Prime Minister, Srimati Indira Gandhi, had such a eulogizing message, for obituary message about him, that his role in the revolutionary movement was a very unique chapter in the annals of struggle against the British, and that he was in a classic mode of a revolutionary. She got a stamp issued in his name, gave a fund from her own private money for a memorial fund in his name. He also got a documentary film made on him from the IMB ministry and all of that. So if he were a British stooge, a coward, a traitor, and an Islamophobe, a Gandhi murderer, whatever, all these epithets that are thrown at him, why was the tallest leader of the Congress, Indira Gandhi, actually supporting such a person? And what is the justification that today's Congress, will they disown Indira Gandhi as well and say that actually supporting a traitor? So I think it's all rooted in today's contemporary tutu meme that goes on between political parties, and in the process I think historical figures and history becomes a very sad casualty.
Mr. Sampath, writing a biography of a man like Savarkar in itself is a process. You absorb a lot of things. There are things which stay with you as a person. It's not just a clinical, objective, scientific exercise. I want to know from you that when you researched and wrote on Savarkar, what was the perception which changed in context of the way Indian contemporary history is presented? What was what you unlearned, and what in the process you learned?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. I think two things that the left takes credit for: revolution and social reform. Both these things were actually championed by the father of the Hindutva movement in India, somebody who started India's first organized secret society, Abhinav Bharat, who organized the first ever bonfire of foreign clothes in Pune before the Congress did the bonfire of foreign clothes, who asked for complete freedom in 1905 when the Bengal partition was going on. In 5 years in Europe, the kind of revolutionary movements with several other brave hearts that was done, his whole renaming of the 1857 war as the first war of Indian independence, and not derisively call it as Sepoy Mutiny as it was by the British. All of this, and the kind of sufferings, inhuman tortures that he faced for over a decade in cellular jail, which I don't know how many other the Congress leaders who were lodged in jails like this and kind of tortured. There are very few parallels other than execution, which brave hearts, again revolutionaries who got executed. I'm not sure how many people in the non-violent movement actually got executed. So they were kept in jails with comforts and Aga Khan Palace and all of that. I'm not disparaging the sacrifices that they did, but then to make commentary about somebody who suffered so much and the entire family suffering so much, all his degrees being snatched away from him, and including his law degree, his bachelor's degree from Ferguson College, and on paper he was just a metric pass. So this whole revolutionary space, which is conventionally thought of to be the preserve of the so-called left in the country, that shook up for me. Of course, Savarkar was influenced not by Marx, but by Italian revolutionaries like Garibaldi and Mazzini and others. He not just spoke about it, also implemented it through intercaste dining cafes, intercaste marriages, access of Vedic literature to all castes and communities, building the first temple in this country in 1931 called Patit Pavan Mandir, where people of all castes could enter. So, path-breaking social norms for which even Dr. Ambedkar actually, praised him and sent him many eulogizing, letters saying, you're the only one who understands that Varna system needs to be removed to actually get rid of Jativad in this country. So all these facts, again, if used, and the two main planks on which the left normally, champions itself, it's actually taken away from them. And that was a huge, learning experience for me too. Of course, the emotional aspect of actually going to cellular jail, and not only Savarkar, the 100 plus, prisoners who were lodged there, the kind of tortures that they faced, and the kind of, ingratitude that we as a nation have. We don't even know their names, let alone, pay our tributes for them. How much more ungrateful can we be as a nation that our forefathers who gave up their lives, who suffered the worst of ignominies, the least we can do is to at least have their names inscribed everywhere and to pay our homage. We don't even do that. Instead, we sit in our air-conditioned rooms and pass judgments about they could have done this, they should have done that, he was a traitor, I don't know how many of them will actually go and survive even one day in a place like Kalapani.
But then Ambedkar gets away with a lot of things, and Savarkar gets penalized. For example, both said the same thing. They had the same views on 1942 Quit India, but no one dares attack Ambedkar.
Correct. That's very true, because he's politically very hot, political capital. There is a vote bank. He's been appropriated by communities. And so people are very scared to actually bring into public the notions of Ambedkar on, say, Islam, which he considered as a closed corporation, and that it would never allow, the theology of Islam would never allow an Indian to be loyal to this country, because there's always a division of world into Darul Islam and Darul Harab and all of that. And he advocated a partition of the subcontinent and a complete cleansing of populations between the two divisions. And even on 1942, he was part of the Viceroy Council at that time. And he called it a treachery to the nation and the launch of the movement, and actually said it's a patriotic duty of every Indian to not participate in 1942. But today, does anyone have the guts to call Ambedkar, a traitor or homophobe and all of that? There'll be riots in India if someone does that. But then Savarkar, you can do that because, there's no political vote bank attached to him, perhaps. And it's all par for the course to say whatever you want, whether it is backed with historical information or not.
Vikram, is it also because of the fact that there is an attempt to to create one hegemonic imagination of history? Like, for example, no one criticizes the Congress leaders. Some of them went to the assemblies, but some went with Gandhi to do the root work. There were many who wanted to work with the society, and that was their quest towards freedom. Some wanted revolution, but they were all working towards one goal. But 70 years down the line, you want one narrative of freedom struggle. Is that the real issue?
That is very, very much true. And we had that infamous exchange even in the parliament, where the leader of the Congress, Mr. Mallikarjun Kharge, in a reply to Prime Minister Modi, said, your dogs did not participate in the freedom struggle. So who are you to sit on that seat of the Prime Minister? It is naturally belongs to us because we are the party who brought independence and all of that. So that whole sense of arrogance and entitlement that there is only one party and worse, one dynasty which actually worked for freedom of this country and nobody else suffered. I think that's been the bane of the way we understand freedom movement in India. But sadly, even during their own time, when Savarkar was released in 1937 from Ratnagiri and he joined the Hindu Mahasabha, there was so much of camaraderie between politicians. There were so many words of praise from congressmen, from Nehru, from Subhash Bose, from Rajgopalachari, even from the left, whether it was M.N. Roy or S.A. Dange and others. In fact, Rajgopalachari, in that letter of when he was released, he also makes it clear that he wrote a biography of Savarkar in the 1920s when he was so impressed by the brave acts of this revolutionary. So there was so much of healthy, and of course, Indira Gandhi's statement I already spoke about. So there was such a lot of healthy, respect for each other, though they differed in political ideology. And people like even M.N. Roy says, I may differ with Savarkar on his Hindutva ideology, but I respect the man for what he did. But today, the country and its politics has become so polarized that even this basic human respect for one another, it's not there. Whether you are with us or against us, and anybody who does not subscribe to is treated like a personal enemy.
Is it, and my last question to you, is it because of the fact that the inability of the Indian academia to absorb freedom fighters with their own contradictions? And do you feel that, Savarkar is a victim of the stigma politics? How can Gandhi speak to Savarkar? That was the the core issue when that function happened. How can you say that Gandhi had nothing to do with Savarkar? Yeah. So, there are two things at play, you inability to absorb people like Ambedkar, Savarkar, even Gandhi, in his experiments with truth, with all his contradiction. And secondly, this attitude that, how can you say that, they have nothing to do with this guy? Do you think that's the real issue?
Yeah. Yes, stigma, persona non grata that he was made to become, even a relation with him would actually penalize people. They would lose their jobs and livelihoods and so on. So that was post-independent, India's sad narrative, where you may disagree with someone, but I don't think you need to stigmatize somebody. And sadly, I keep saying, where the stranglehold of just one hegemonic, Marxist ideology, which rules the roost in academics, where no other alternative voices are allowed to thrive. And then the same people will also turn back, take jibes saying, where are the right-wing, intellectuals and so on. Obviously, there may not be too many, only because you didn't allow many to thrive. Careers used to be ruined because you held different points of view. And almost till recently, eminent historians in Delhi, in their textbooks on freedom struggle, used to term Bhagat Singh and Rajguru and Sukhdev as terrorists. They were not called as revolutionaries. So imagine a young person who reads these books, and at the same time in the news you are seeing terrorism in Kashmir or the Naxals and all of that. In his or her mind, it's all the equation is going to be that Bhagat Singh was one of them. So what kind of respect are we? So they talk about, Bhagat Singh being so great, etc. But their own textbooks that they wrote actually termed him as a terrorist and not as a revolutionary. Terrorist would be a term that the British government would have used against someone like Bhagat Singh. So, but sadly, these are the people who speak with folk tongues that both sides, on the one side, you eulogize Bhagat Singh and use him as a counter to Savarkar. And on the other side, you also call him such names, which has very, very deep connotations for young people when they read such terminologies.
Stigma is the word. Thank you very much. Brilliant analysis, Vikram. Thank you very much for joining me on this edition of On Point. Thank you.